It's probably an appropriate microcosm of all of my flaws that I decided to make my foray into YouTube video essays by taking on a topic way out of my depth, which is live theater. I've always enjoyed theater, like when it comes to me. My wife had had a lot of experience with live performances in her childhood, so she's always been a fan. But we went to, way more Marvel movies than live shows. We've only seen the significant stuff that's made its way to our city, like Wicked, Porgy and Bess, Color Purple, and that's probably it. And I've thoroughly enjoyed these experiences, but I'd be very hesitant to try to analyze any form of live theater that wasn't a wrestling match. So for the rabid Hamilton fandom and the people who are outright experts on the topic of theater that I'm sure exists, rest easy. As a stage play, I don't have anything really negative to say about it at all. I'm happy to have finally seen it essentially for free, considering how much tickets cost at a live show. And it's by far the best thing I've watched all year. Now, that's not saying much in 2020, but it is. And I'm regretful that I didn't get to see it in theater live. It's a masterwork of song and storytelling, but this channel is all about analyzing black art through a black lens. And despite Lin Manuel Miranda being Puerto Rican, make no mistake, Hamilton is a piece of black art. And as such, well, things get a little complex. There's some stuff here. There's some stuff. So Hamilton is a creation of one Lin Manuel Miranda, who grew up in New York City, actually went to school with underground hip hop legend Immortal Technique, who supposedly bullied him in high school, which is kind of amazing. And his New York roots and love for hip hop can be seen all over this work. It's the work of a truly brilliant mind, and despite my general apathy for theater, I can't deny I was enthralled with the songs and the story of this work. By the second song, I was hooked. And not just the music, the subtle hip hop references it had, but the way Miranda crafted a compelling story out of real history. I am a complete nerd for a good story that's well thought out with plantings and payoffs, and this is full of them. The driven and vexing nature of Hamilton, the complex pseudo-love triangle between him, Eliza, and Angelica, the tortured villain in Aaron Burr, the outright badassery that is George Washington. I knew some of this stuff historically going in, but not all American history is taught through hip hop, so it hit different. But it was also around that second song that I started to have issues, and some heavy cognitive dissonance started to settle in. A little voice in my head started saying, hey Feek, yo, you're listening to rapping slave master. So in between legit riding on every word and swell of music, I also found myself tackling with the innate problems of what is being presented. I began to take issue with the idea of Hamilton, the play, as opposed to the totality of the work itself. See, Hamilton was a creation of a different period in time before something happened to send us into the darkest timeline that we're clearly in today. It debuted in 2015 and was surely in development years beforehand. So we're talking about peak liberal Obama bliss right now. Key and Peele is on TV. Game of Thrones is still good. The Supreme Court had just affirmed safe-sex marriage. The Tea Party nonsense was mostly dying out. We found water on Mars. Obama was attacking the prison industrial complex. Louis C.K. was still okay to like. Yeah, there were drone strikes killing people and children, but it felt different, And of course, that's part of the problem. The country as a whole was enjoying this progressive liberal high and had gotten real congratulatory, not recognizing what was actually on the forefront. So yeah, in 2015, a play about rapping slave masters might have seemed quaint. That said, unless you're living under a rock, we're in bad times now. The few years between Hamilton's debut and now have seen the world, and America in particular, drastically shift their perspective on America's bloody, racist, sexist history. The last few weeks alone have seen decades-long fights over Confederate flags and monuments end in sometimes literal flames. Much of America is shifting its palette for sugarcoating and hand-waving over the brutal history of racism and slavery that is often presented as subtext in most stories of American history, whether they're accurate or fantastical. And it's clear I'm not the only person who caught this, who felt this way in hindsight.
We haven't changed the text of this show since 2015, and yet it feels like it changes because the world around it changes so fast. things that popped out when Obama was president may not be the things that get a reaction when Trump is president. Immigrants, We Get the Job Done certainly gets a different reaction. If there's anything political about the show Hamilton, its thesis is everything good or bad that was present at the founding, at the roots of this, the birth of this country, are still present. The fights we had then are the fights we are having now.
I'm not alone in recognizing some issues here. There's definitely some things to talk about that hadn't been brought up yet. Things that I thought about when I first heard the premise, but didn't care enough at the time to get into it, especially without having ever seen it. The 4 years since Trump's election have been pretty much exactly what most left-leaning people have feared, and in response, attitudes, especially in black spaces, have greatly changed. Things that were funny under Obama suddenly don't seem all that fucking funny anymore. People that were getting away with edgy humor for decades are apologizing preemptively before the Twitter dragon comes for them. The real monsters and creeps are being rooted out and really legit canceled, not just temporarily canceled. In general, progressive spaces just aren't for the bullshit these days. Terms like cultural appropriation become more prominent, and black art as a whole is a much more protected space. Where we once thought it cool and quaint to share and incorporate white people into our art spaces, we are now openly hostile to any unearned incursion into blackness, and every white newcomer is met with extreme scrutiny, and black purveyors of the arts are held to a high standard of decorum. So of course, watching Thomas Jefferson spit a hot 16 feels super fucking tacky right now. That said, the criticism of Hamilton as problematic does not need hindsight to be legit. I'd argue that it would have faced a similar, if not much more subdued criticism had it been more widely consumed back in 2015, had the tickets not cost $1,000 fucking dollars. The criticism may have been more measured at the time, pre-Trump, pre-Twitter, but it still would have been valid. So let's get to it. What is problematic about this stage playing story as a whole? It really does come down to a weird and difficult to quantify kind of misappropriation of black art. Not so much cultural appropriation as the people creating it are of the culture, but it's inappropriate in the way that they're presenting it and who they're presenting it to. Specifically, we're obviously talking about hip hop. But let me be clear first. This is good shit. And it's not just cute, clever theater rhymes like ha ha ha. No, there's love in these lyrics. There's multiple overtures and nods to everything from hip hop hits over the years to dances in the form of stepping and crumping. The cipher is here, the rap battles. This is hip hop in its truest form, just a completely foreign and possibly inappropriate venue. Classical Broadway musical type theater is an undeniably white space. Yes, there are plenty of black stage performers who are incredibly talented, and there's a grand history of black drama and plays and playwrights, let alone the legacy of the Chitlin Circuit plays that have been around for generations. And this is not to say that the concept of drama is distinctly or innately white or European. Dramatic storytelling with actors is something that many non-white societies can lay claim to over the course of time. But modern theater is definitely a distinctly white medium, or at least more accurately, the consumers of this medium are distinctly white and even more overwhelmingly of a bourgeoisie class. Black people, working class people are not going to spend $1,000 for tickets to anything except for maybe a Beyonce concert. Because of this, any form of hip hop that bleeds into modern theater is in its essence a transgression against hip hop's origins and roots. Hip hop came from the streets and was a new version of the blues meant to provide a voice for the voiceless men, women, and children experiencing modern blackness in America. Of course, it didn't stay that way, so this is not to say that it's outright wrong or problematic for hip hop to be used in theater, but that there always needs to be some form of recognition that this is at its core not how it's intended to be consumed by this medium and this audience. But surely we recognize that hip hop jumped the shark fucking decades ago. My boomer hip hop purist days ended in the 90s when I started to grow chest hair. If hip hop were so sanctified, this would never have happened.
Oi, it's so humid. Oi, it's so humid. Oi, it's so humid. It's like a sauna in here. Oi, it's so humid. Oi, it's so humid. Oi, it's so humid. It's like a sauna in here.
Quarter past 3, we were chilling out front, working up an appetite, thinking about lunch.
No, But bigger than hip hop by itself is the context of the story it's being used to tell and who it's being told to. There's something inherently problematic about rapping slave masters. If I hadn't made this clear yet, if you ask me, fuck these guys. Straight like that, all of them. Don't get me wrong, they're interesting historical figures, and yeah, we should always keep in mind they lived in a different time with different standards of morality. But no, all of these assholes were either outright racist themselves or were perfectly comfortable with racism as long as it allowed them to maintain power or pursue power. George Washington was a brutal slave owner. His mythical set of wooden dentures was made from actually real teeth, usually from slaves. Jefferson is on record with his very stringent and legit beliefs that African enslaved people were inferior to white people and that we should be sent back to Africa for the good of the nation. And this includes Hamilton, whose abolitionist legacy is a bit muddier than it appears in the play, as he and the Styler family definitely owned slaves. So what we have here is a black art style being employed in a mostly white medium for mostly white audiences about all white historical figures that completely excises any discussion of blackness from the story outside of a few throwaway lines. Therein lies the problem. Had it not been good times and had the audience for this not been what I like to call get out liberals, this play probably would not have become the phenomenon it is today. Moderate and radical black thought leaders would have called it out much earlier, like they did the planned Antebellum show that Dave and Dan were supposed to do after Game of Thrones before people realized they sucked at writing. If you're not with me yet, let's just try a quick thought exercise. Let's take this play, give it the same level of talent, the same stage direction, the same songs, choreography, same everything, except instead of the kaleidoscope of melanin joy gracing the stage, imagine if they were all white. And don't tell me it couldn't be done. Sure, it may be a little different. There's always a little element missing when white people, even the most talented, perform something that is innately black. But it still could have been done easily to a high level. How would it have been received if white creatives had come up with all of this and employed an entirely white cast to bring it to life? I'd argue that it wouldn't have been nearly as big. I don't think people will have been as open to watching a bunch of white people sing their own history, no matter how hot the fire was that they were spitting. If there's one thing that white people have historically loved about black people, it's our talent and culture. Seeing a white cast perform black art wouldn't have had the same effect on the audience. It would have been impossible to ignore the cognitive dissonance through the medium. But here's the real kicker, right? Aside from changing the way the audience received the message, if the cast was all white, what else would really change? Pretty much nothing. Although we can see that the actors are people of color and the characters are definitely white, the story completely ignores this paradox through its colorblind casting. Aside from a few moments where there's a wink and a nod to the crowd regarding the ethnicity of the actors, there's little real racial subtext to diffuse the paradox on display. I've come across arguments that this is the point, that you're supposed to feel a sense of cognitive dissonance about the founding fathers in them being portrayed by people of color, but still having the ugly history of racism and slavery as a part of their story. That having them be played by people of color and watching just how crude and cutthroat they were with the infidelity and the backroom deals and the literal white on white crime, that this is supposed to put on display just how unvalorous the founding fathers actually are. But no, that doesn't work. That doesn't fly. First and foremost, if the only way we can see the flaws of the founding fathers is to remove their whiteness and put a black face on them, well, that's really fucked up. But beyond that, although I do get that the cognitive dissonance was probably an intentional facet of the play as a whole, I honestly don't think that changes anything about my criticisms. For one, at the end of the day, this story is not all that critical of the characters as historical figures. So yeah, there's some dissonance being felt when seeing George Washington played by a black man rhyming over a snap beat, But at the end of the day, George Washington is still seen and depicted as heroic and noble and an important founding father. He's still a bog standard historical portrayal of Washington as a badass. He's greeted by applause when he comes out. He hits the stage with one of the most bombastic bangers of the entire show, and it's fucking great, and I hate it. Hamilton is seen as a visionary. Even Aaron Burr comes off as sympathetic. Jefferson is called out for being a slave owner, and there's a distasteful even for the time reference to Sally Hemings used as a throwaway gag. But Jefferson is still greeted with applause and gets his own showy musical, his own big number, and we still respect and appreciate him at the end. These are not nuanced depictions of these characters that force us to truly tackle with their legacies beyond the fact that they are American founding fathers. The play doesn't challenge you to love these figures through their flaws. It focuses on their political conflicts and struggles, but ignores the most paradoxical and hypocritical elements of what they were doing at the time, which is fighting for freedom while outright owning people. It's not hard to like these characters. These characters are awesome, and that's a problem. None of the real critical race issues of these figures actually factor into a reading of this play. The only real dissonance is, look, James Madison looks like dude from Lean on Me. Now, to be honest, this being done by an all-melanated cast is not problematic on face value. There's a double meaning in the concept of freedom as is employed in the play. They did try. The nature of some of the music, its overtures to old Negro spirituals, is not lost on me. And there's a place for the mythology of these heroic figures, warts and all, to still be celebrated. But even if there were some serious critical race messages in this work, the other problem is relying on white audiences to fully get this. Here's a hint: they don't. White audiences as a whole rarely ever fully get complex messages about race in media. I still have white people coming up to me to tell me how important the movie The Help is. White audiences appreciate very simple, unchallenging conversations about race in media, which is why movies like Help, Crash, Green Book, Driving Miss Daisy, etc. tend to win Academy Awards. White audiences don't fully get it. They liked Black Panther. They didn't fully get it. They liked Get Out. They maybe barely got that, but that was only because it became a thing on Reddit. Dave Chappelle spoke to this when he left his show back in 2000 and whatever year that was.
Okay, you mentioned a moment ago that you felt that there were some things that weren't socially responsible. Like what?
Like there's this one sketch we did that was about this pixie that would appear whenever racist things happens. Whenever someone make you feel like they calling you that N-word, but don't say it. And it was funny. It was a good spirit or intention behind it. But what I didn't consider is how many people watch the show and how the way people use television is subjective.
I completely understand.
Yeah.
Go finish, because I have a story to tell you.
So then when I'm on the set and we're finally taping the sketch, somebody on the set that was white laughed in such a way. I know the difference of people laughing with me and people laughing at me. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten a laugh that I was uncomfortable with. That there's a lot of people who will understand exactly what I'm doing. Then there's another group of people who are just fans, like the kind of people that scream, "I'm Rick James," be at my concerts.
Yeah.
That they're along for a different kind of celebrity worship ride. They're gonna get something
completely different.
Completely different.
Yeah.
That concern me.
Yeah.
I don't want black people to be disappointed in me for putting that out there.
No, you didn't want to be disappointed in yourself.
You know what, Oprah? You're right.
Yeah.
You can have the best intentions in your work that you plan to be consumed by white audiences. But at the end of the day, when white audiences can only see black folks shucking and jiving, you have to consider, is what you're doing helpful or harmful in the long run, and should you continue to do it? I personally subscribe to the sentiments of one of my favorite media critics in saying that you can make a good story out of almost anything. I'm also at least 1 foot in the whole separate the art from artist camp, especially when the problem of the art is not so much the art or artist itself, but the changed societal attitudes around it. In a better world, we should be able to enjoy this work without being bombarded with thoughts of how it reflects a naive and lost time in history. It would be great to live in a world where white people could consume black art without thinking about how that behavior fits into structures of racism and oppression. I wish I could see George Washington with the same eyes I saw him with when I was in grade school and think of slavery as just that really bad thing that happened a long time ago. But that's just not the case. The institutions that these men and women perpetrated are ruinous to black people and have been for generations. As much as I enjoyed the play, I couldn't shake that understanding. Maybe if I had seen it in theaters in 2015, I would have, but it cost $1,000 to get tickets. Even Lin Manuel Miranda seems to recognize that the work is problematic in our current context. Maybe that's why he sold to Disney, seeing the writing on the wall going forward. It's clear he recognized that the characters of his story were not perfect and that his portrayal was a bit one-sided, no matter what he tried to do. And I respect him for that. I respect him for not doubling down on areas where it's just kind of best to keep it moving forward. Now, this doesn't mean it should be canceled. First and foremost, who really ever gets canceled? I mean, Tekashi 6ix9ine picked up right where he left off. Somehow Post Malone is still a thing, let alone the countless other people out there still making money off of their products. But complex works of art should definitely not be canceled because they provide opportunities to discuss things and share and develop ideas. The feeling of cognitive dissonance that I got is useful. It's important. I just don't think it was shared by most of the audience for the last couple of years. If anything, please watch this, especially right now, if not just to bring joy to these dark times. But watch it and don't miss where it fails. Sit in that cognitive dissonance, nodding your head to the rhymes of history's greatest hypocrites. Embrace that gray area and moral ambiguity. Good art makes you think. Great art makes you change. And even if the main audience of Hamilton completely missed most of what I talked about here, that doesn't mean that Hamilton should cease to be or that its value is somehow diminished. Thank you.